What is the best wizard build in Elden Ring? And when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about the best build type to optimize magic damage, and this goes for things like spells, skills, and Ashes of War. In this video, I'm focusing on just not only how attributes are split up, but also the best weapon type. However, I'm not going to focus too much on the best school of incantation or sorcery, just because that's going to vary almost entirely on the attribute type. And the rules of ranking goes as follows. The most optimal scaling, the viability in PvP and PvE, versatility and options, and we're all ranking these on a focus of level 125 to 175. So, if you're overleveled, the power of some of these options are going to be shifted around a decent bit. Now with the objectively worst option, that's going to be strength. And that is because there's no strength scaling magic options outside of the dragon incantations. However, there are strength scale weapons that do a significant amount of magic damage that don't really scale anything at all. And that's really the Zamrus Curved Sword and the Watchdog Staff. And the Zamrus Curved Sword is more of a dex weapon, so the only thing really got is the Watchdog Staff. And well, the Watchdog Staff isn't really enough to cover it anywhere, so yes, this is just the worst magic damage build option. Now the next setup will be the Dragon Wizard, a arcane hybrid option. Now unironically, this is still one of the weaker of the few options, but your options here are pretty solid overall. It's still an S tier build, because you get weapons like the Regal of Aochad, the Dragon Communion incantations, which do an incredible amount of magic damage, as well as probably the worst aspect of the build, aberrant sorceries. Now this right here is going to be mostly split in between Dex, Faith, and Arcane. However, if you really want to use sorceries, you go ahead and go into Intelligence, but it's really not a valid option. And this is because the aberrant sorceries just don't do much damage, the bloodlust buildup on them is not that great, and the faith requirements on these spells are incredibly high. However, due to Arcane's much lower soft caps, as well as the fact that a lot of the pure int staffs scale incredibly high, it would still perform much better than on a pure faith route, and that is because the Staff of Guilty doesn't scale too well. Alright, now for the really good options, and that is going to go with the Dragon Communion Seal and the Regal of Aochad. So the reason why these right here work so well is because it doesn't really take too much to get these going, and when you look at a weapon like the Regal of Aochad, it can be power stance incredibly well for itself, and it still has a pretty low soft cap. And on top of that, it's the highest AR in its class. However, the real highlight is going to be the Glintstone Breath and the Frost Breath. That is because these can do an insane amount of damage that can melt most bosses, and for the most part, the range of them are great. The only issue is the fact that it locks you into an animation. Your magic damage ability is great. Your Frostbite buildup is amazing. However, these aren't perfect. So everything with Dragon Communion is going to have a long setup. So you have to know the boss fight. It is a high risk, high reward. You're stuck in this animation and you're going to run out of all of your FP. So if you pull this off in PvP, you're probably going to get punished. If you pull this off in a boss fight, good chance if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to get punished pretty hard. And possibly just get taken out, just like that. So it's the reason why I rank it number 4 on the list. Alright, number 3 on the list will be the Deaf Sorcerer and the Stance of Ice and Fire. A int faith setup that does incredibly mid in terms of actual sorcery scaling. At least at lower levels. At higher levels, it is by far the best. And that is because all the Glintstone staffs that scale off of it have incredibly high soft caps. In fact, if it weren't for the fact that Faith gives amazing buffs, this right here would be a pure int build. But the opportunity to increase your damage by 50% kind of make it so Faith really does win this one out. When you go this route, you have 3 primary options. You could go for either the Faith int weapons, you could go for the Deaf Sorceries, or you could go for just regular sorceries, just buff yourself to an insane degree. Now overall, your best spells are going to be the Ring of Spectral Light if you're going to go for the sorcery setup, in which that is not buffed by the Prince of Death Staff, so you may as well just buff yourself up, wear the mask, and use the Staff of the Great Beyond, as well as just going for Ancient Death Rancor, which is not going to do too much damage, but it's still something. However, where this build really shines is the Faith into weapons, which are just absolutely incredible. Both the Renalis Twin Blades as well as the Sword of Night and Flame are amazing weapons. And the best part is, they soft cap around level 50 to 55, so you really don't need an insane amount of investment. These are just one of the better magic builds in the game, and they're, well, one of the best magic weapons in the game. However, it's not good as like the Dex int options, but it's still an incredibly amazing setup. Mixing in both the Staff of the Great Beyond, later on at high levels the Prince of Death Staff, which is one of the best scaling staffs in the game, at least when you're overleveled, and the Golden Order seal, which is just the best scaling seal in the game. And that's what a Faith int build does. It has the maximum amount of variety, and that's all it really needs. Yes, it does lose at about 15% scaling to a pure int build, and unless you're overleveled, it definitely does not have the best sorcerer scaling in the game. But it really doesn't need that. It's just pretty well rounded. Alright, and now for the second best magic build in the game, and this is just stupid. I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not even sure if this should really count because you're really not casting spells, you're just doing some of the best magic damage in the game through weapon skills and Ashes of War. And yes, you can make a full dedicated build off of it, even if it doesn't really make any sense. In fact, it is good at too many things. It has amazing frostbite, it has amazing blood buildup, it has amazing... goddamn, why is this even in the game? The stance damage is incredible. It's a pure dexterity build. Don't get mad at me. I can explain why. First of all, one, Ice Spear is absolutely incredible, and the Divine Beast Frost Stomp is incredible as well. However, this is all topped off by the Claws of Night, which do a significant amount of magic damage, making it probably the best scaling magic weapon in PvP outside of maybe the Sword of Night. And let's not forget about the best version of Zamar's Ice Storm, which comes from the Zamar's Curved Sword. It does not scale anything, however, it is a dexterity weapon and much more accessible on a dex spell than anything else. And so overall, it does cover a lot of the niches that a pure int build does. In fact, if you want to do magic damage, but you want to also proc status effects, it's probably better to go for the dex setups rather than going for the aberrant sorceries, the cold glintstone sorceries, or the Gavel of Haima. In fact, for mid-range and close-range combat, it covers pretty much every niche incredibly well. However, it has two weaknesses. One, it doesn't have any chip damage, and two, it doesn't have a sniper option. And so with all that combined, along with the fact that there's not really any other options outside of what was stated, that's kind of why I have to rank it at number 2, because it is still just a very narrow set of options that just work incredibly well. Now, a bit of a special call before I go to number 1, and this is going to be the int dex builds. Mostly from the fact that you're already going to be able to use these weapons on a pure intelligent build, as long as you have a little bit of dexterity, and you probably are, because casting speed is kind of useful. And so when the weapons really aren't scaled on dexterity, it really doesn't matter how much dexterity you have after that. It really only matters if you're using, let's say, cold weapons more than anything else. And now for the best magic setup in the game, the Witch of Night. Power stancing 2 Staves of Loss. Okay, I'm joking kinda, but it's a pure int build. Okay, don't get me wrong, there are other good wizard setups in the game. I mean, you have the Meteoric Staff and all other staves in the game. It's just the fact that Night Comet is so good that it kind of makes a lot of the other int stuff much less relevant. It's able to outdamage pretty much any spell in the game, at least for single target, and enemies cannot react to it, at least in PvE. In PvP, it's a little different. And because the Staff of Loss gives a 30% increase in damage, so the best way to optimize it, even the Prince of Death staff at max level, is still 2 Staffs of Loss, or a pure intelligent setup. And then when it comes to PvP, of course the best thing is Swift Glitter Shard and the Gravitational Missile. And the best way to optimize those is still a pure intelligence build. And because the Karen Regal Scepter scales so well to 80 intelligence, even when you go and split your stats into, let's say, Faith or Arcane to meet the requirements for something else, because the Karen Regal Scepter scales so well, that unless you are about 65 in both Intelligence and Faith or Intelligence and Arcane, it's not really going to matter. It's not going to scale high enough. And even then, those extra points can be put into Dexterity, which could be used to increase your casting speed and give you better weapon options. Because the majority of all Intelligence weapons have good secondary dex scaling. So overall, yes, the best attribute overall for being a wizard is intelligence, no duh. However, here's a final caveat. If you're overleveled, then Int Arcane or Int Faith is going to be a much better option, because if you have about 70 in both, it's going to pretty much outcompete the Karen Regal Scepter. And because the Maternal Staff boosts the finger sorceries, that is probably one of the best category of sorceries in the game right now, then now, well, that's the best one, Int Arcane. However, if you're also using buffs, then it's going to be Int Faith, because a 50% boost of damage is just absolutely absurd. So whichever the best one is, it's going to be based off of level, but that's why I categorized it the way I did. Now overall, there's much more to all these builds. This is just ranking the magic damage. So for many of these hybrid builds, they could do amazing things. They have some of the best skill and seals in the game, and so they may not be the best at doing magic damage. They can be the best at doing either fire, physical, lightning, or holy damage. Even then, the biggest thing that you can look at is you really don't need to build intelligence to do magic damage. There's other options, especially with arcane and dexterity. And while they may not cover every single option or tool, it's this great amount of variety in the game that allows this game to be, well, exceptionally well designed. So for my next upcoming videos, I'm going to be focused on how to do different elemental types of damage and different ways to approach it based off of, well, whatever attribute you're playing. Alright, well, I hope this video was at least somewhat informative. I hope you guys have an awesome day, and see you in the next one.